Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Karl-Anthony Towns Season Preview. Which areas of Cat's game did he improve in the most last season? And what does that tell us about what he might be able to do in the 22-23 campaign alongside Rudy Gobert? How teams might try and defend the Wolves and how Karl-Anthony Towns himself may counter with all, these new facets of his game that he refined last season. What can we expect this year out of Cat? It's all upcoming on the show here. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. NBA preseason action started this weekend. The Wolves get underway on Tuesday evening against Miami. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Today, I want to focus on Karl-Anthony Towns and previewing his season. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find Locked On Wolves anywhere. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also my account, which is at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. And oh, by the way, one of those new platforms, this is brand new. You can find Locked On Wolves plus all the other Minnesota Locked On podcasts are now all available on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV as part of the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. It's more great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. It's an awesome way to get caught up on, of course, this show and also all the other great Locked On Minnesota sports shows. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about Karl-Anthony Towns today. This is the last part of I think a 19 or 20 player series. Some shows early on, we did 3 Exhibit 10 guys or 3 non-guaranteed contract guys in one show. We did a couple of players where we did full shows or half shows on them. So I want to spend the entire show today talking about Karl-Anthony Towns. We should open with an update on his health. Of course, he missed media day last Monday and practice the middle part of last week was nowhere to be seen due to a non-COVID illness. They said he was away from the team. And then he was at the open practice on Saturday at Target Center. He was there in person, but not participating. And Chris Finch said that the Wolves expected him. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he basically said they expect him to be doing low-level basketball activities here early this week. So to be back on the floor. And then it came out later on Sunday. And this was actually posted by Jordan Woods, of course, Karl-Anthony Towns' girlfriend or fiance maybe now. But she said on Instagram that she took Karl-Anthony Towns to the hospital when they got in Minnesota, or when she got to Minnesota last week. And it was a non-COVID illness that hospitalized him briefly. It sounds like. So, obviously thoughts and prayers with Cat. It sounds like he's doing better if he's around the team, but who knows how long he'll actually take to run back into place. Obviously his health is his health in general is first and foremost, most important. But who knows what that means for conditioning, et cetera. We're still, he's obviously not going to play Tuesday for preseason, but we're a couple weeks out. The first regular season game, I believe, is 2 weeks from Tuesday. So he's got a little bit of time to get back into to basketball shape. And, we'll obviously keep an eye on that. But sounds like, at least according to what Chris Finch is saying in the media, doesn't sound like something they're expecting to really hinder getting the team ready to play this season. Or for the start of the season. So let's focus on Cat last season, what he did, kind of a refresher on some of the things he was really great at. And the fit with Rudy Gobert, we've talked about this a little bit on Friday. We did Rudy's preview. So, there's some overlap there, of course, but just generally what that could look like, specifically some areas that he was great in last year could continue to improve in. And then also rotation wise, what is this thing going to look like? So first of all, I think it's important to say, we'll talk a little bit about the fit here first. I am not, we'll do fit first and we'll do kind of stats in the middle portion here. Like where was he much better versus, last year compared to the year prior. And then we'll get into rotation last. So, I'm not worried about the fit between Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. I mean, Towns effectively has played as a 4 for massive chunks of his career on offense. Even if technically he was playing the center, how many 4s has he played with that actually were centers? And I've gone through this. If you're a regular listener, you know, Gorgie Jang, obviously early career Gorgie, he is and was a center. Taj Gibson functioned as a center, even though he was smaller than Karl-Anthony Towns. Jared Vanderbilt functioned as a center offensively, didn't have touch beyond, you know, where the rip, you know, had bad hands, didn't have touch outside the paint. You know, pretty limited in terms of what he could do offensively. And those aren't the only guys either. You could go back through all the bigs that Towns has played with, and a lot of times he's functioning as the 4 on offense anyway. So his skill set, now obviously he played a lot in the post, but you know, I mean, for all of time in basketball, power forwards also can play out of the post. So it doesn't mean he can't post if he wants to. Those numbers, you know, we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment here, but the post touches went down a little for Cat last year, and that's because of how teams chose to play the Wolves. The Jazz, somewhat ironically, were one of the first teams to do this, where Rudy would guard the 4, so Jared Vanderbilt last season, and the Jazz would stick a 4 on Karl-Anthony Towns in the post, and then they could just front the post and double from the backside, make, first of all, the entry pass more difficult, and then also just kind of squeeze Towns on the block where he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, might make a crazy pass, try to pass out of the double team or force something, maybe an offensive foul, charging over the help from the backside. Teams would also occasionally play him with the 4, you know, and if Towns didn't go fast, they could double him from the perimeter if Towns didn't catch and go, right? And that's something we saw. Even Anthony Edwards talked about that. It was post game last year, kind of like December-ish time frame, early in the season, relatively early in the season, where he was like, hey, if Cat goes fast when he gets the ball, no one can stop him. But if he takes it too long, the opposing defense can double. And that happened sometimes last year with Towns. That was an issue. So the Wolves' counter to that, Chris Finch's counter to that, was as the season wore on, they played more and more 5-out offensively. Towns got the ball in the perimeter a lot more. And of course, on the perimeter, you know, he was too physical for most 4s to actually guard him. Like, I mean, people like to make fun of Towns for, you know, the stupid straw man, you know, he's soft argument, which is ridiculous. But he would sometimes in the post bowl over 4s if the double team didn't come and then get called for offensive fouls. But on the perimeter, he's just too powerful, too strong to get past 4s. And sometimes they could, some savvy defenders could go to him in offensive fouls still, but he was obviously too quick for 5s to guard on the perimeter. So if you put a center on Towns, you're just asking for it, right? You give him too much space, he's going to knock down the 3. You play up on him, he's going to blow past your 5. He's going to probably overpower your 4. So the best move with Towns last season was generally playing more 5-out. He did get more mid-post touches, got some touches at the elbow, at the free throw line, extended kind of that high mid-post area that Chris Finch likes so much in his offense. And it helped Towns avoid double teams, right? You know, playing him on the perimeter more. You can't really double at the elbow. You can't really double on the perimeter unless you want to, you know, and sometimes Towns tries to get too fancy for his own good when passing the basketball, but doubling anybody on the perimeter straight up is just kind of a recipe for disaster. And now that the Wolves actually have 5 players that can hurt you offensively, right? There's not somebody like a Jared Vanderbilt, or going back a couple seasons, a Ricky Rubio, somebody that you could just leave. You can't really do that. Yeah, Jaden McDaniels isn't an ultra efficient offensive player, but he's not far off from being really impactful. And he can obviously dunk over people. He can shoot the 3. You know, he's got talent. D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, you can't leave those guys open. Rudy is going to have so much gravity, you know, rolling and around the rim in general. Anyway, he's a far better lob converter, way, way better than Jared Vanderbilt. I mean, Rudy would convert, and this isn't the actual number, but I want to say that Rudy converted himself like 4 or 5 times more lobs. Could be a little, this seems right to me. I read this somewhere that Rudy converted like many times more lobs himself last season than the Wolves did as a team. The Wolves had, I know this for a fact, the Wolves had the least number of lob conversions of any team in the NBA last season. And that's just because Vando didn't have good hands, and Cat isn't really a lob threat in general. And, you know, just there weren't, unless you're talking like an alley-oop in transition, there just wasn't much of a threat there. Rudy changes that, right? So the spacing is going to be much better for this Wolves offense than it has been in the recent past. And I expect the Wolves to play more 5-out, and, you know, pick and roll with Rudy. You could play horns with Rudy rolling and Towns popping. Obviously, if those 2 bigs are involved in the action, the opposing defense knows that's what the Wolves are going to do, but it's still going to be really hard to stop. You still have to kind of pick your poison. Is it Rudy on the lob? Is it Towns on the pop outside the arc? Is it D'Lo or Ant off the dribble, right? It's going to be an absolutely dynamic offense. And Towns is going to fit pretty seamlessly next to Rudy Gobert, I believe. So I want to talk a little bit about stats, about some of the numbers, the places Towns really improved last season, both straight up, shooting percentages, places on the floor he liked to be, etc. And then also some of the different play types that he excelled in last season. So we're going to do all that here next. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors from today's show. And that is, of course, our new friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. I've been a hiring manager for, the better part of a decade now, and it is not always easy to find the right candidates in the right place. And trust me, LinkedIn can absolutely come through. You can simply add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's important to finish the year strong, and the right team member might help you do that. We are getting down to it, the last quarter of the year, of the calendar year here. So finish the year strong. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Now, make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview starting October 10th. That's a week from today, next Monday, a 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey all combining into one ultimate NBA preview. Of course, yours truly will be part of that. I'll be part of a group of teams discussing that are expected to break into kind of the upper tier of the playoffs, up and coming type teams. So we're going to do a roundtable podcast that'll be part of that series next week. Starting next Monday, the 10th, search for Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 in your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, let's talk stats when it comes to Karl-Anthony Towns, his season last year, and what to expect this season. So Cat's shooting numbers generally bounced back last season to where we saw them prior to the back-to-back COVID shortened seasons, right? So 2 seasons ago, or I guess it will be 3 seasons ago, Cat opened the year with some of those knee issues. He missed some time in December. There was some other, I forget, there was a wrist issue as well. So knee and wrist, and he had never really missed time. Remember the first 3 seasons of Cat's career, he played all 82 games. Then he missed a handful of games, 2-3 games after he had a concussion in a car accident in his 4th season. And then I think he sat a couple games at the end of the season that year. And then he had this injury shortened season with the knee and the wrist, and then COVID actually shortened the season. So that was just a couple of years ago. And he only played in 35 games that season. And then the year after that, the 2021 season, was shortened on the front end because of COVID. Cat also had a little bit of injury issue, missed some time due to COVID himself. So he finally got his shooting numbers past year, the 21-22 season, back to where we had seen them a couple of years ago, prior to all the injuries, prior to the COVID shortened seasons. And the actual, just the field goal percentage, the effective field goal percentage, which is a better measure of overall efficiency, the 3-point percentage, it all bounced back. So a couple seasons ago, he was 38% from outside the arc. Last year, he's back up to 41%. The third time in his career, he's been 41% or better from 3-point range. The field goal percentage was back up to 52.9%, which was his best since the 17-18 season. That was his first All-Star season, also known as the Jimmy Butler year, the last time the Wolves made the playoffs prior to last season. So you're talking field goal percentage and 3-point percentage up near the best of his career. Well, his free throw percentage was, dipped a little bit. His actual free throw rate was up pretty significantly and was a career high for him. A .385 free throw rate. Another way of saying that is for every field goal attempt he shot from the floor, he was averaging nearly 0.4 free throw attempts, which is really, really good. The free throw rate was very good last year. And when I say his free throw percentage dipped, he was still 82% from the free throw line. It's just he was 86% the year prior. So for his career, he's still at 83.3% free throw shooter. So more than likely, that's just a blip on the radar. So you look at an improving 3-point percentage, an improving overall field goal percentage, and an improving free throw rate. That's a recipe for a far more efficient offensive player. And that's what we saw last year from Cat. The free throw rate, I think that can partially be attributed to him playing more on the perimeter in 5-out situations. Remember, mid-season, we saw that 3-point attempt rate start to dip a bit because, ironically, somewhat, because he was playing on the perimeter. So we saw the 3-point rates dip because teams were playing him tight. They didn't want him to shoot 41% in their face from the perimeter. So teams were trying to crowd him. He was pump faking and driving, getting his head and shoulders past guys, has those long strides, drawing fouls going to the rim. Now, at times it was a bit of a bugaboo for him because he would commit offensive fouls. He had an offensive foul rate higher than anyone in the league. Nearly 1 in 3 of his fouls committed are on the offensive end of the floor, which is just completely bonkers. But when he wasn't getting himself into foul trouble, other teams were fouling him like crazy because he had a good pump fake. Teams were petrified of his 3-point shot, and rightfully so. And so he could just beat these, slower 4s and much slower 5s off the dribble. And also better pump fakes on the perimeter, drawing people into the web, some of those things he really improved on last year too. So more face-up dribble drives from playing 5-out on offense and playing on the perimeter more. And actually, believe it or not, in pick and roll game, which the Wolves ran a little bit less of last season, of course, than the year prior, because Ryan Saunders had a ton of that in his offense. Chris Finch did it less. And of course, these things are all kind of peaks and valleys, how often it's it just kind of depends on opponent and time of year and all that stuff, depending on how much they're running pick and roll. But even if it felt like he was popping more last year, that's not really the case. He just was on the perimeter more in just straight 5-out sets. But he actually popped slightly less out of pick and roll game. Last year, he only popped 33% of the time. 2 seasons ago, it was 37% of the time. So he rolled last year 62% of the time when he was a screener. And because he rolled slightly more and was dribble driving more in face-up kind of isolation situations last season, the free throw rate went up, which is, of course, phenomenal. It's what you want to see. The most significant area of improvement for him in terms of points per possession came in face-up situations and isolation situations. So in isolation 2 seasons ago, Karl-Anthony Towns scored 0.86 points per possession. This is according to B-Ball Index. 0.86 points per possession in isolation is good. It's 67th percentile league-wide, which rates out as a B according to B-Ball Index. 0.86 points per possession in isolation. Last season, Karl-Anthony Towns, that number went from 0.86 to 1.07, which was 100th percentile league-wide, an A+ for isolation scoring. Cat had more opportunities in isolation last season because the Wolves were spreading teams out. They were letting him attack from the perimeter, and he was so good at it. He was an A+ according to B-Ball Index, a 100 percentile in terms of isolation points per possession. The spot up points per possession was roughly the same, actually a tick down, 1.09 last year from 1.11 years ago, but still an A-, still essentially 90th percentile league-wide in spot up situations. So spot up in isolation, which we saw a lot more of last year. By the way, he was so good offensively last season that B-Ball Index has this entire list. You can find similar numbers on NBA.com/stats. But for every single play type listed, there was only one that Cat didn't rate as an A-, an A, or an A+. And that was pick and roll ball handler points per possession, which how often does Cat operate in the pick and roll? He may do it a little more this year. Who knows? We may see more big pick and roll between him and Rudy. But that was the only one he didn't at least have an A- in his grade last season at B-Ball Index. He was fantastic. He was, in some of these, he obviously didn't do a whole lot of, right? As a cutter, 1.44 points per possession, 99th percentile, an A+. Coming off of screens, 0.97 points per possession, an A-. Transition, 1.27 points per possession, 95th percentile, that's an A. Across the board, an A- or better in every single play type except for one. So 10 of the 11 play types listed by B-Ball Index, who's A- or above. All the advanced metrics back that up. The only area we really saw a dip in besides free throw percentage, which was very, very minor, was the rebounding. And that was more a function of the way that the Wolves played defensively. He just wasn't around the rim as much, which was by design. And the rest, defensive rebounding was an issue for the Wolves. It wasn't really Cat's issue. It was the rest of the guys weren't rebounding their position. Cat was being asked to do something different. The role was different. He was being pulled away from the rim by design and blitzing pick and roll instead of getting beat as a, dropping in a drop pick and roll coverage, which of course Rudy can do. And with his length and the skill that he has as a rebounder, he can drop and still be an effective rebounder. Cat was a better rebounder as a dropper because by definition, you're dropping closer to the rim, right? as playing high wall pick and roll coverage on the perimeter, Cat's further away from the rim. He's getting less rebounds. That's just how it works. And the Wolves knew they wouldn't be as good of a defensive rebounding team in that coverage, but it's what they had to do to try and win. And it worked very well, especially early in the season. And then the issue was that the other guys, Ant being maybe the biggest culprit, Jade McDaniels, Naz Reid, all those guys need to improve their defensive rebounding percentage. Now, Rudy's going to cover up a multitude of sins there, and Cat will also have more opportunities. I wouldn't be shocked if Rudy's rebounding numbers come down slightly from where they were in Utah, and Cat's probably come up a little bit from where they were last year. And the Wolves as a whole will just be a better rebounding team. Obviously, you had the league's top rebounder from a year ago, and Cat playing some different coverages. They'll have more opportunities to rebound the basketball this year. Okay. I want to talk rotation and a couple more stats here to close out the show. So a little more on Cat. And Tuesday, we'll talk about Tuesday's show here in a minute. We're going to preview Wolves Heat as we have actual, real live, albeit preseason NBA basketball. So we're going to do all that here next. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. I did pretty well this weekend. Not as much on the college side, but on the pro side on Sunday, did pretty well. Had a couple of nice parlays, and just generally felt good about it. And again, win totals for NBA, go check those out. There's some I would say tasty win total numbers out there that you could find, get some good, now is the time to strike, I guess, before we see preseason, and for better or for worse, that'll influence some of these win totals. Now would not be a bad time to jump on some of those. And again, the Timberwolves one remains tempting. So head on over to BetOnline for that. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close the show today by talking a little rotation related to Karl-Anthony Towns. I should say, stat-wise, over at B-Ball Index, as long as we're talking about them, their site's fantastic. They give out a number of badges for each player. There's definitions over at their site. And last season, Karl-Anthony Towns added several badges he didn't have a couple of years ago, and he got a gold for contact finisher. So his at-the-rim numbers were actually really good last year. So the whole list of finishing statistics, shots at the rim per 75 possessions, unassisted rim field goal attempts per 75 possessions, rim shot creation was an A, graded out as an A by B-Ball Index. And then all the, foul drawn rates, adjusted field goal percentage at rim shot quality, rim shot making, those were all A minuses, all in the 85 to 87 percentile at B-Ball Index. So a ton of great numbers for Cat at the rim last year. And again, more of those opportunities because he had more off the dribble opportunities, the ball in his hands more in the half court. And Finch knew, like, hey, let's not force this post up thing. When a post up is generally a lower points per possession opportunity anyway, a much lower floor on what you can do from the post. When he's having a tough time handling these creative double teams that other teams are bringing, let's just get the ball in his hands on the perimeter. It's kind of like in football. It's football season. I'll use a football analogy. When you have a playmaker that you want to get the ball in his hands, but you're having a tough time getting him open in a route or whatever, or you don't want to just straight, if maybe it's a running back, you don't want to just straight, run up the gut time after time. So you come up with creative ways to get the ball in their hands, whether it's wide receiver screens or bubble screens or whatever. Just, jet motion, like different, not using way too many football terms now, but like to really just get the ball in their hands any way you can, because that's better than just, doing exactly what the defense is expecting or not using your best player. So with Towns, instead of posting over and over and over, it's let's get him the ball in an advantageous spot on the perimeter where, you can't double him. They're going to have to send somebody to try and, I don't know, take a charge, which I guess worked some of the time, but like to try and send late help as he's driving to the basket. It was also a recipe for Towns himself having a great free throw rate last season. So, it'll be interesting to see how this works with Rudy. And again, I think it'll be relatively seamless. But to see how teams try and defend the Wolves this year will also be really interesting because it took a minute for teams to figure out what worked last year. And then Finch countered with something that worked, very well with putting Towns on the perimeter more often. So that'll be a bit of another round of cat and mouse this season with how teams try and defend Cat. Rotation wise, as I've said before, Cat's obviously going to start at the 4 next to Rudy at the 5. I think, and Finch has said as much, he wants to have one or both of them on the floor at basically all times. And I think it's realistic to play 42, 44 minutes a game with at least one of those guys on the floor, barring foul trouble. That's why you have Naz Reid. It's why you have Nate Knight. I think Towns will probably play. Ultimately, it's probably only 14 or 18, maybe 20, max 20 minutes next to Rudy per game at the 4. Otherwise, almost half his minutes are still going to come at the backup 5. You figure Rudy's going to rest he's only going to play 32, 33 minutes. That leaves 16-ish minutes out there. So maybe Towns plays 16 minutes at the 4. He plays 16 minutes at the 5. And then Rudy plays, 16 with Towns and 16 at the 5 without him next to, say, Kyle Anderson at the 4. So, and obviously these are rough numbers, but Towns is still going to play something like half his minutes at the 5 without Rudy on the floor. But they're going to start and ideally finish games with Towns at the 4 next to Rudy Gobert. I think Kyle Anderson's the primary backup at the 4. You could see some Taurean Prince in smaller lineups. You could see some Naz or Nate Knight in bigger lineups. If Towns gets into foul trouble and Rudy's not, and they want to play big, you may see Naz or Knight at the 4. I think Knight's probably a better fit with Rudy Gobert, but Rudy could also cover for some of Naz's defensive deficiencies. But that's pretty much it. I don't know that you'll see much Jaden McDaniels at the 4 this season, unless they really want to play small and, maybe somebody, if Prince or Anderson misses a game or whatever. But I think you're going to see a lot more Towns at the 4, Gobert at the 5, Anderson, the primary backup at the 4. And I just think that's what Chris Finch wants to do more of this year. All right. So preseason starts Tuesday. We'll do a quick preseason preview on Tuesday prior to the Heat game. And then we'll do a post-game pod. It won't post till Wednesday morning. Typically in the regular season, we'll do a live postcast. We'll talk more about that, who the guests will be on the postcast upcoming. Excited to announce that. So we'll still do the live postcast this year in the regular season. And then we'll also do a full post-game pod that same night, usually before the following morning. So it'll post overnight following games. In the preseason, I think for the most part, we'll do a show first thing the next morning to follow up the preseason game. So stay tuned for that on Wednesday morning. Of course, we're daily now, Monday through Friday, through free agency next year. So, literally your team every day. We'll be here every single day of the week with a fresh podcast. And we're only 2 weeks away from regular season basketball. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, it's free and available everywhere, wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Also brand new, the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. All other Minnesota podcasts as well, Locked On Minnesota podcasts, are available on the Roku or Amazon Fire TV app. The Locked On Sports Minnesota app, more great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow this show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now, go and make your second listen to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.